So how reasonable is that? And that's really what he talks about in this book.
And he points out clearly that the changes that natural selection is selecting for can't be seen. So what is being selected for is the human being. One giraffe picks another giraffe because it's more fit. And you just see the whole giraffe. You see the whole spaceship, the whole car. But they teach that the selection is happening down on the little changes, the mutation, a positive mutation way down in the nucleotides in the cell that you can't even see. And of course that's not where the selection is happening at all. And so that's the whole system is built on the idea of natural selection is built on the idea that, yeah, somehow it can see those changes and pick the good changes, those mutations, but it can't, because it can't. Right. The reproduction process is not there.
Most of the time what we find, the mutations in living creatures, the results are so incredibly small, so tiny that they don't really have much of an outward effect anyway. And so natural selection is hard pressed to determine, oh, this creature is slightly more fit than this creature over here, so this one's going to die off and this one's going to survive. Well, these differences are so incredibly minor that you should actually end up with a wide variety of creatures kind of ranging in fitness, and maybe the absolute worst creatures, you know, ones that aren't really even able to survive a few days because they're the mutations are so harmful. Those, of course, are going to be wiped out in nature. But most of them, natural selection can't really touch the other mutations, can't filter out the better ones and leave out the worst ones because there's so tiny a difference between them. And that's one of the things he brings out in this book too.
If there were beneficial mutations, and we'll talk about that in a minute or two. But let's show this 6.5, 7 minute section of film, and they'll cue that up, and we'll be back to see you guys in 6.5, 7 minutes and talk about what we see or anything relating to philosophical, spiritual things.
The human mutation rates are much too high. Much too high for what? Well, much too high to allow the conventional evolutionary scenario to be feasible. That's what it means, too high. Genetic mutations are overwhelmingly bad, they're too frequent, they're largely invisible, and they're linked in clusters. That slide was one I snagged from John Sanford's presentation. So for many decades, geneticists have worried about the impact of mutations on the human population. As early as 1950, Mueller, Crow, is more recently wondering about the effects. When the concerns first arose, see Morton, Crow, Mueller, these guys, I don't think that's Miller. Maybe it's Mueller, 1956. Maybe a typo. Yeah, I have a bad copyist. See, fat fingers. Yeah. Okay. Based on an estimated rate of 0.12 to 0.3 mutations per person per generation. So that's what they were thinking. Maybe this would be okay. The serious concerns, though, persisted about the accumulating mutations leading to a high genetic load and a generally degenerating population. So they're really wondering, how many mutations per individual per generation? What is that number typically? There's been a long-standing belief that if the rate of deleterious mutations approached 1 deleterious mutation per person per generation, long-term genetic deterioration would be a certainty. Well, why? What happens is, to prevent deterioration, you would need to eliminate mutations as fast as they occur. We would need to prevent mutant individuals from reproducing. That would be eugenics. But also need to leave enough remaining people to procreate and produce the next generations. So suppose, well, I think I have this in the next slide, so I'll just see. Since global fertility rates are now less than 3 children per 2 adults, only 1 child in 3 could theoretically be selectively eliminated. So if you're willing to go through the process of saying, okay, this one's a mutant, that one's out. If you have 3 children, you can toss out 1 and keep 2 if you think the 2 are going to be okay. On average, so will you have a growing population or will your population be dwindling if the mutation rate is higher? If you want no mutations to be accumulating and a mutation burden growing in the population. So this is why it's such a big issue for population geneticists. They've been very eager to discover really what is this rate. The very astounding recent findings in the world of genetics. The human mutation rate just within our reproductive cells is at least 100 nucleotide substitutions. Now that would be only one kind of mutation. Those would be like the misspellings in the DNA. Per person per generation, this would be according to Kondrashov 2002. Other geneticists would place this number at 175. Notman and Kroll 2000. Actually, Kondrashov to John Sanford in a personal communication, he said the 100 was the lower range, or the lower end of the range. He thought it was more around 300. So the question, the human mutation rates, are they much too high? Let's see, let's get a picture. So suppose you have, if there are mutations in these and you want to continue the population, if you're practicing eugenics, then you kill the ones that have the mutations so you'll allow them to propagate into the next generation. I guess that's okay if you're a plant breeder like John Sanford was. Maybe if you're breeding fruit flies or something, but if you're in the process of growing a family, that doesn't work very well, I think. So, if you want to have no mutations propagated downstream in the population, you have to get rid of those mutant individuals. That's what you would call selection cost. In this case, it would be a very serious selection cost if you're talking about human beings. So you would have to lose that many. So maybe if you have a high enough mutation rate, maybe each female would have to have 10 children. To have 2 going downstream, you have to have at least 2 so that your population remains equal. If you have less than 2 per family, then you have a dwindling population. If you're above 2, then you have a growing population. But what happens if you have a large number of mutations? If you want no mutations to propagate downstream to the subsequent generations, you kill everybody. We're all mutant. Many times over. Many times over. Many times over. So Kondrashov indicated to Sanford that he thought the actual rate is closer to 300. And again, this point that we made before, since the portion of the genome that's recognized as functional is increasing, then the higher percentage of those mutations would be recognized as functional, as deleterious mutations. And this number is still too small because it only considers point mutations. It does not include other kinds of common mutations, deletions, insertions, duplications, translocations, inversions, and all the mitochondrial mutations. So all those things where you're copying little pieces of DNA and RNA, and things get copied, you can miss this. Something might get turned around in inversion, or put in the wrong place. So it's even higher than this. This chart is probably can't see it too well. Maybe I scanned out of the book this morning. But basically, if you include all the different mutations, mitochondrial mutations might be less than 1 per person per generation. But if you include nucleated substitutions, maybe approaching 300, satellite mutations, you have deletions, all these other, the number per person per generation may be greater than 1,000. So you're not just talking about 1 mutation per person per generation that they were worried about 40 years ago. So it's very clear. It's very clear. It's not an uphill deal. It's all downhill.